going to be a few minutes late, so we will go ahead and start anyway. We do have a quorum in the room. So the first order would be the approval of the agenda, which we have in front of us. It consists of the approval of the minutes, the approval of the quarterly report, special presentations by Raptalis, drainage fee feasibility analysis and update, and then presentations of the fair share agreement, financial update, infrastructure update by the City of New Orleans, infrastructure update by the Surge and Water Board, drainage consolidation working group update, and then any public comments or other business. So with that, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda. So it's been moved by Mr. Single and second by Ms. Raymond. All in favor? Aye. Approved. The agenda is approved. Each of you has a copy and was sent earlier, a copy of the minutes from our previous meeting. So I hope everybody had a chance to review that, and if there are any notes or corrections about it, let us know, and if not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Been approved by Mr. Morris.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Raymond. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the minutes have been approved. We also had sent out over a week ago the quarterly report that we're obligated to produce and send to the mayor, governor, and the city council, and we are also sending it directly to the Surge and Water Board, obviously, and also to our local legislators now. So again, are there any comments or questions about the quarterly report?
Not accept.
All right, Ms. Hammonds moved that we accept the quarterly report approving. Mr. Stengel seconds. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the quarterly report. So with that, I would like to start the special presentation, which is drainage fee feasibility and analysis, and Surge and Water Board, and Hassan has graciously gotten Raptalis to present to us. So Hassan, would you like to start?
Yeah, certainly. Yes, we appreciate the opportunity to allow us to present and share with you what we think is a very thoughtful way of putting together an assessment of how we should fund drainage in the city. And much of it brings good common practices from other cities. Raptalis has done work and then tell you across the nation, so they bring a lot of expertise and a lot of good practices to us to consider. There's some policy recommendations in there, but we all know that the policy doesn't start here, or maybe it starts here with recommendations, but it really ends up in the hands of the policymakers and the Common Council ultimately to structure the fee any way they see fit. So our job is to present you with good alternatives, good thoughtful ways of approaching it, phasing a drainage fee possibly, and then let folks kind of assess all the options and hopefully come to a very reasonable conclusion at the end of the day. So with that, we have Keith and Henrietta who will present to you, and they welcome all questions and suggestions to improve the presentation as we move forward. So please don't hold back, and I told them that you can ask tough questions and make good suggestions, so we're counting on that. So, thank you.
Well,
So with that, Keith?
We've got a bunch of shy people here.
Thanks a lot. Tell me right off the bat if folks can hear me okay.
We can?
Yes.
Good. I'm Keith Redling. I'm Executive Vice President with Raptalis. And also with me is Henrietta Locklear, a Vice President and the practice leader for our stormwater management funding practice within the firm. And we do have a presentation. We're going to tell you just a little about ourselves and our scope and what we learned and heard in the course of our analysis our recommendations. We want to talk about options for implementing new funding a little bit. And we want to try to go fast enough to allow for some discussion and answer some questions. Our company is the largest and most experienced utility financial and management consulting firm in the nation. Next slide, please. And which I guess, yeah, it's still not that big a company. We have 160 people, but Henrietta and I have been here about 11 years, and it was about 25 when we came. So we've grown a lot. It's a niche business. We're really focused on finance, management, and program building for utilities. We've served a lot of public agencies that themselves serve about a quarter of the US population, 38 of the 50 biggest cities in the country, and New Orleans is around number 50. So a good sized firm. And also, next slide, we do a lot of work for utilities that are drainage focused. And these green dots on our map here show our clients. The yellow ones are in the stormwater management business. Worked with about 140 drainage programs in the United States, and Henrietta and I have helped set up about 75 stormwater utilities during our combined efforts. And so we've done this a lot in a lot of places. It's always different, but there are frequently common themes of aging infrastructure and we need more money. And so some of those things don't change much. Now I'll hand the ball to Henrietta for a few minutes here.
All right, thank you, Keith. And going to the next slide, we were engaged, as Ghassan and Keith have said, to assess the feasibility of a drainage fee and to update a previous study that we did. And there were three elements that were critical to the effort. The first was an assessment of the current situation. So we gathered new cost data, new geographic data, and importantly, perspectives from a variety of stakeholders. Second, using those new data, we updated our previous analyses and created a new financial planning model to accommodate the third, and one of the most important elements was developing options. So, additional funding and fair funding is needed, but in the complex environment that we find ourselves in, we need to imagine some different options for how to arrive at that goal. On the next slide, you can see that the tasks our program scope was broken into included an updated understanding of program and revenue requirements, an analysis of rate structure potentials, a look at data and systems to support a fee, and importantly, units of service, which refers to estimating the amount of impervious area, in this case, that's in the city and would be charged a fee. So now on the next slide, I'll hand it back to Keith.
Okay, so we talked to a lot of folks. We talked to a lot of grassroots thinkers in the city. And we had done that as well in an earlier effort that culminated with the report in 2016. And this work is kind of an update to that. And the three recurring themes that really kind of weave a lot of the fabric of the story is most everybody agrees or acknowledges that it would take more money than being spent now to manage the integrated drainage system better than now and well enough. And when I talk about the integrated system, I'm talking about the major system for which the Sewerage and Water Board has responsibility now, and that is system components larger than 36 inches in size or conveyances that convey more than a 36-inch pipe, as well as the minor system, which are, the street drains and the connected infrastructure that drains to the bigger stuff. Right now, the city's obligation. So more funding needed. Everybody believes that. I'm still on the prior slide. Stakeholders really want fairness and equity and want to be heard. So there's a lot of sense in the community that the government broadly defined is out doing things, but what I think and wish is not heard, and that the millages aren't very well liked. Everybody feels like they're not, or a lot of entities feel that they're not fair. At the same time, there's a fairly significant sense that a combination of funding between millage funding and fee funding, which is what we recommended in 2016, might not be that feasible in terms of public sentiment. And also that any kind of rate structure implemented need to have some levers within it to make it maximally fair, and that's what a credits program for a drainage fee is. And then also that community distrust is high in the Sewerage and Water Board or the city for major or minor system, that mistrust is a significant issue as well. So we can now, moving on to the next slide, we've kind of come up with a sense that our definition of equity here that would be responsive to community priorities is that everybody ought to pay something. That's not how it is now. There are large, powerful, and in some cases wealthy entities that are tax exempt. So under millage funding, not everyone pays, but there are also a lot of residential customers whose properties are not valued high enough for them to be paying anything toward drainage under the millage approach. That equity means we ought to charge a mansion and a small house differently, that one flat rate for residential ratepayers is insufficiently fair. So we think a series of 3 flat rates, and that's a fairly common construct in stormwater funding. Again, that a credits program should exist whereby a customer or a ratepayer who's doing something helpful by putting some green infrastructure on their property or making sure the rainfall has places to go, should be able to get a discount on their bill, and that's what a credit is. And then lastly, the fourth leg on the stool, that ratepayers who are truly harmed and do not have the funds need to be able to get help somehow through an affordability program as things work with water and wastewater now. So our recommendations then are, the main ones are that the Sewerage and Water Board should take the major and minor system, spend more on O&M and capital, and in the near term, that revenue requirement we think is $100 to $110 million a year. They spend about $72 million now. $64 million of that is coming from the millages, and the other $8 million is fair share revenue. 15 or 20 million of that is minor system cost. The minor system is in poor condition. It has not been, O&M has not been very well funded for it. And it's it's integral to the function of the integrated system. It's the most visible part of the drainage system in many cases. And the poor condition of the minor system contributes a lot to, curb deep flooding, poor road conditions, and things like that. To get this kind of money, we think a gradualism mentality and a phase-in of a fee would need to be in place. We think a fee is more fair than millages. It's typically more sustainable, but we need so much money here, and the millages generate so much money that a long-term transition feels most reasonable. We think that we could use user fee revenue headroom in the revenue stream to service new debt issuances, to jumpstart more capital. And we would recommend a rate structure based on impervious area. This is the industry standard, with simplified residential rates, 3 flat rates, like I said, a credits program, and an affordability component. So were we to do that, then the drainage fee funding that we could generate on the next slide, we would be able to handle the things across the bottom, which is what the Sewerage and Water Board does now. the pumps and canals, the power master plan, O&M of the big infrastructure, as well as across the top, taking over and improving the minor system and doing some programmatic things that are responsive to the community interests in some of the things that you've heard the Water Collaborative talk about and other folks talk about in terms of workforce development, capacity building, reforestation for all the trees that have been lost in the hurricane and past, and do this integrated set of services. So a fee in place, plus the millages, more revenue, operate to provide these four kinds of things. And Henrietta's going to talk a little bit about more details about how the fee part could work.
Thanks, Keith. So now that Keith has spoken on our recommendations a bit, I want to hone in a little bit on the last bullet from one of the previous slides about rate structure and talk about what that looks like in practice. On this slide, you'll see some New Orleans residential properties. And on one of these single family properties, you'll see an area in red. And that is the impervious area for this lot. So in an industry standard rate structure for stormwater, the fee is based on impervious surface. And the unit is at the unit of charge, which would be similar to a per 1,000 gallons of water or kilowatt hours for energy, is called an equivalent residential unit or ERU. And it is based on the typical impervious area on a single family detached property in the community. So then all properties are then charged based on that measure or unit of charge. So we measured a sample of properties from aerial photography, and we computed that equivalent residential unit for New Orleans, and that is 2,760 square feet of impervious area. In many communities, because single-family properties are numerous and pretty homogeneous, utilities will use a very simple rate structure for all of these properties. Like Keith talked about, it's very simple to administer. And sometimes it may be one flat rate for every single one of those properties. But in New Orleans, as Keith noted, equity is a key concern among residential customers in particular. And so we're recommending an approach with a bit more equity built in. And it would mean that a small footprint wouldn't pay the same as a large footprint single family detached house. So the medium ones would all be charged one equivalent residential unit. The smaller ones would be charged 2/3 of an equivalent residential unit, and the larger ones would be charged 1.5 equivalent residential units. And so that's how this set of properties would lay out. The benefit of using a standard unit of charge like an equivalent residential unit is that there's rate equivalence or parity among properties. So on these next few slides, I'll show you a few landmarks that we also measured impervious area on and how that rate equivalent works. So on the next slide, this first one is the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel, and it has over 46,000 square feet of impervious area on 2 parcels. And so it has 18 ERUs, or 18 times as much as the typical house of impervious area, and it would be charged 18 times as much as that home. So imagine that the fee for an average house is $10 a month, for example. This property would be charged $180 a month. You got it. All right, next is another property you'll readily recognize, the Superdome, falling on several land parcels you can see here. And as you know, it has a lot of impervious area, 636 times as much as that house you saw in the previous slide. And then finally, on the next slide, here's a smaller commercial property outlined in red in East New Orleans. It's a Save-A-Lot, and it has 14 times as much as impervious area as a typical home. So it would be charged 14 times as much. So now I'll turn my attention to our thoughts on implementation and the options that we've talked about a bit that may give us a path for implementation of needed funding. So You can see here, the options we've developed fall into a few major categories. And, yes, oh,
Before
go
we
ahead.
proceed. Go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Just a quick question.
Sure.
What were the thresholds for the small, medium, and large on the number of square feet? So is the
that's-
medium the 2760?
Yeah, it
Okay.
is.
Yep.
So when we
Okay.
modeled it, typically, if you look at a frequency histogram, if you measured all the residentials, there aren't many tiny ones. There are a lot of medium ones, and there aren't many giant ones.
Right.
And we typically put 50 to 80% of them in the middle chunk, with 1 unit of impervious area being the median within that chunk, which is the 2760.
Okay.
So the thresholds we modeled were up to 2,200 square feet of impervious area was a small one. 22 to 3,300 was medium, and that's where most fell. And above 3,300 was large.
Got it. Thank you.
And just importantly, I know you know this, but just that is not how many square feet your house is. That's how many square feet of impervious area is on your parcel.
Got it.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, the options that we show here may allow, a path to be selected, as Ghassan said, by policymakers and stakeholders here. So one set of options relates to phasing in a fee, which we've mentioned a couple of times. Remember, Keith and Ghassan both talked about it. So one option might be Sewage and Water Board may phase in who pays. We have heard along the way that some stakeholders are really focused on the idea that the transition to fee funding should first happen for tax exempt customers, for example. Another possibility is that the transition could apply to all non-single family residential properties. So that's other than those houses or the house I showed outlined in red, commercial, institutional, and so forth, which would include the tax exempts. And then at a later time, roll into charging the fee for residential customers. A second set of options, so to the side of that number 2 there, also relates to phasing in, but it relates to how much customers might pay initially. It's clear from speaking with the Sewage and Water Board folks that it will take a little bit of time to ramp up to that more comprehensive care for the minor system. It can't be, boom on day one. So it makes sense to also ramp up rates and revenues a bit over time. And so an option within this set relates to commercial or non-single family properties that are already paying a good deal in millages. We could do a transition for these properties potentially to ease into the new fee. In Philadelphia, we had to take this type of approach to cap the impact to some customers over time when the water department transitioned to a parcel-based charge from a meter-based charge. That's a little bit different than transitioning from a tax to a fee type of charge, but may be a possibility. Third, some options exist around the existing funding source, the drainage millages. So in our previous study, we pretty firmly felt that all of the current funding through millages should be retained and the fee should be added on top of them. It's very expensive to provide drainage service in the city. But in this update from our discussion with stakeholders, it was clear that at least the 6 mil, which is expiring in 2027, is unlikely to garner the necessary public approval to retain it. And further, that the expiration of the 6 mil may be an important lever in the fee development process. So in our current model, in consultation with Ghassan and his team, we assumed the expiration of that mill for modeling purposes in 2027. Lastly, with every feasibility study, there's a consideration of how to actually convey the fee to customers. So which piece of paper, which billing system is going to, do the work of getting that fee out to the customer, whether it's a utility bill like the Sewage and Water Board's current water and sewer bill, or the tax bill, or an independent bill, which is not typically recommended, as you might imagine. Each mechanism has some positive and negative aspects in terms of administration, collections, and which customers, taxpayers or utility customers, would be the ones paying, and also in terms of cash flow and some other considerations. In the case of Sewage and Water Board, the tax bill may have some advantages over the utility bill. For example, given that at least some of the millages would likely be in place, especially at first, the impacts of the transition to the fee would be placed on the same customer base that bears them now. So when I talked about that, the options up in number 2, that phasing in would apply to the same customers. And then in addition, the cash flow would mirror the current pattern that the Sewage and Water Board experiences. So with that, I'll turn it back to Keith.
Okay, home stretch, 2 slides to go. So just to reiterate, we think this approach would be responsive to community priorities. Everybody would pay something. We would have a fair residential rate structure where there was some differentiation between fancier and less fancy properties. A credits program that would allow a refinement of what an individual ratepayer is charged to reflect some special things they might be doing with their property that reduce their runoff or demand for service, and an affordability program to help those in need. And so were we able, and I'm to the last slide here really, were we able to pull this off, a drainage fee could generate over a 10-year period, if we could keep our millages in place, new revenues of about 178 million. And that's with a 4-step phase in, with the first revenue in 2026. We could create new jobs by funding $83 million in new operations for the minor system and small scale green infrastructure, workforce programs, and provide $356 million in new capital infrastructure by using about half of that revenue stream to issue new debt and service the debt. And under this 4-step phase in, the way we modeled it was a $10 rate that was applicable to a subset of ratepayers in the first year. So $10 per unit of impervious area, perhaps for just the tax exempts or just the non-residentials, or one of those paths toward a phase in like Henrietta described. The next year, the same rate, but applicable to all ratepayers. And then every other year, a rate increase, so that 10 years out, the rate is $20 per month per unit of impervious area, or in that range. And we acknowledge that the tough part here might be that the 6 mil that expires in 2027, if that doesn't renew, you won't have all the millage funding. That millage funding by 2027 is about $20 million a year. So if it does expire, we'd be far ahead with the drainage fee plus the other 2 millages, but not as far ahead as we kept all 3. And that's our last piece. And we would love to entertain any questions or discussion. We're required to point out that we're registered municipal advisors within the SEC 1934 Act.
Are there any questions?
I have a question. What is the relationship between your report and your research and the Water Collaborative's research? Is it part of the same research?
No, it's not.
Are 2 insane efforts, and both are needed.
Okay.
So we are presenting basically best practices, alternatives, a lot of the mechanics. What they're doing is they're doing the outreach, the policy, the appetite of the public. What do they want to see? The level of service desired. How much green infrastructure do we want to invest in versus gray? Things like that. So we would be doing what they're doing if they did not exist. So we don't necessarily agree on everything, per se, but
Right.
we have a significant overlap. And as you remember, Jessica was here
Yeah,
a
last.
while ago,
Yeah.
and we're getting closer. We're meeting on regular basis, making sure that we're in alignment, and we're, at the end of the day, for this to be a successful effort, we have to, kind of
Right.
work toward the same cause.
Because when we go out to the public, we gotta be on the same page.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
hands down, yes.
I have just a big question that I'd like to see if you could help me put my head around. Right now, we have about 50% of the property in Orleans Parish paying millage.
Mhm.
And that's generating $62 million a year.
Yeah.
Okay. The other 50% of the property that isn't paying anything, if they paid $62 million a year,
Yeah.
we'd have $120 million a year.
Assuming you maintain the millage as is and you tack on something else, yes.
But the assumption then is we generate $120 million a year, which is sufficient for your planning. And when the millage is over, the people who are now paying $62 million in millage pay $62 million in fees. There's a transition there. So everybody ends up paying, the people who are paying what they're paying now pay the same.
Mhm.
They don't pay a fee on top of the millage.
Right.
And the people who aren't paying anything now pay an equal amount.
Right.
And we hit the goals.
So you're spot on. The only thing, and I'll let maybe expand, but the math doesn't necessarily work straight as we think, because currently some properties who are paying taxes through millage, their fee is going to be significantly less if we use just the square footage of their
Got it.
property.
Got it.
So somehow we got to make up that loss, either by increasing the fee somewhere or spreading it, increasing the ERU and associated fee. So it's not as straightforward, not to mention what do we do with the folks who are already exempt, who don't pay anything in millage, and now if you want to impose a fee, do you continue to exempt them, or do you introduce a new fee to them? That's a policy decision, not mine, but
Yeah.
big decision.
I was a little confused because when I thought what I heard is that the villages would stay in place. Is that
That's their
correct?
Well, we can only, it's not really something we can influence, right? I mean, it's gonna expire in
They-
Their
27.
numbers assume the villages stayed in place, is that
Yes.
correct?
It assumed that it will expire in 27.
Yeah, the other two would stay in place.
There's 3 villages currently, and the first one that expires in 27,
But the others would stay in place?
yes. And somehow we will adjust, but those are way out.
So is in the plan, would there be any adjustment? So everybody pays a fee, and some people are going to continue to pay villages or some villages. Is there any adjustment for that, or just that's where it's going to, you don't know yet?
Well, it can be anything, and this is not, we're not the first city that basically transitioned from millage or taxes into a fee. Many cities before us, and you can attest to that, had gone through that exercise. The one complication is that the exemption, which has to be addressed one way or another. And it's just, it's a math problem.
Is there a way to tell that someone who's now going to be the $20 a month, let's say $10 a month, $120 for the year, for that mid-range ERU, what are they now paying in millages? That same
Yeah.
square footage
There's a way to quantify that easily by
is
doing.
what we're proposing higher and lower than the millage.
It varies based on the current area. Keith or Ariana, you want to share what you've done? Taking some examples of, let's say, your house, what do you do now?
Yeah, so right now, the millages are generically known as the 3 mil, the 6 mil, and the 9 mil. But they're not precisely those millage amounts. When you add them up, they're about 16 mils. So currently, real property that is taxable inside the city pays $160 a year on $10,000 of tax value. So that is in the range of what a property would pay for one ERU at $10 a month, 120. The challenge is that as you imagine implementing more fee and millages expire over time, that there are very valuable taxable properties that don't have much impervious area, like a high-rise building. And on the other end of the spectrum are large paved areas that might have low value, don't pay a lot in taxes, but would pay comparatively a lot in fees. So the shift from tax funding to fee funding can create big swings and is one reason it's often phased in, like Ghassan said. So currently we know that $10,000 in tax value pays $160 a year toward drainage services in the city through millages.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it's helpful, thank you.
Well, on that, could I ask, sorry I came late. Has it been announced whether these millages are subject to the homestead exemption or not?
Well, they currently are. I mean,
Yeah, they currently are.
These
These are
are
existing
These are the current villages.
You know, so if someone has a property that's 70,000 in value, they're not planning
They're not
these
paying
millages? Because some villages subject to the homestead exemption and some are not.
I did not realize that even, so
These are
I'm
all
assuming-
subject to the homestead.
Homestead
exemption.
exemption.
The only ones that are not, I believe, are police and fire. Police and fire.
I would say, Mr. Henry did an exam, so I didn't own a house, you know, and I didn't realize it's 16 mills, right at $160 a year per $10,000 of tax value. So if I subtract out 75,000 homestead exemption, out of my property tax bill, I paid my drainage is right at $1,600 to $1,700. So, and if I would pay this, and I would pay the fee, you know, based upon my home, so $10 a month, assuming the middle value, so that would be an additional $120. So to answer the question relative to, I'm a homeowner, yes, I'm paying millages right at $1,500, $1,800 a year. The additional stormwater fee at $10 a month at that mill would be an additional $120 a year. So again, it's not a lot. Well, I'm saying it's not a lot, but if you look at that 120, we would say that $10 a month. I mean, I like Kenny's chicken, so it's sort of like a 3-piece finger chicken sandwich at Kenny's once a month. So, and it goes toward, we'll say, and then Joe says it at every ribbon cutting you do, the funding is really needed for infrastructure to keep improving our infrastructure. That's what your $10 a month is going towards, improving and maintaining that infrastructure, which is really key.
If this fee is proposed by the council, can the council implement the fee, or does it need to go for an election?
We believe this would be subject to public vote.
So you got to have a win-win conversation.
Yes.
I guess in being simple in my thinking about this, if we're really trying to get to equity, people who are paying now wouldn't pay more, even $120 more, they wouldn't pay more. And the people who haven't been paying anything forever would pay an equal amount to what they're paying, assuming that it's a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
That probably could be something that you could get to with some pretty smart mathematicians.
Yes. I mean, the idea here is, or the approach is not to have a duplicate fees, you know, villages with fees stacked on, it's either or.
You'll never get it passed.
We get that. So that's why the 120 would be replacing what you currently pay. But again, because the swings one way or another, somebody has to make up for that.
Sure.
So.
Yeah.
You know, I think also in underserved communities, when you think about this, and he says it's not popular for the community. Again, I think that the workforce piece is critical to see how this is going to impact their families, their communities, and their neighborhoods. If you can sell this on the fact that even though you're paying additional fees, you create additional jobs for people in your family, in your community, and they can really see that and feel that, I think they may be able to support that.
Yeah, we're gonna argue that we bring more equitable and fair structure, with creating opportunities for, job creation, I think that's the win.
Yeah, it is.
To argue that, hey, we can convince you to pay more taxes because we're gonna create jobs, I'm not gonna do that.
Sure, yeah, sure.
It's just not a winning proposition today. People are very, very overwhelmed with, all sorts of costs, and we want to be cognizant of that.
What does the affordability program look like? How would the affordability program work?
Keith?
Henrietta, do you want to talk about that or you want me to?
I can. The idea would be that there would be fee reductions or assistance available to customers who had a hardship or, had a lot of trouble paying the bill. And I think the way it would be administered would vary based on whether it was the fee is conveyed on the tax bill or the utility bill. But it wouldn't look so different than the types of programs that the Sewage and Water Board already has to help customers with water and sewer.
Elisa has her hand up. Elisa, would you like to go?
Sure. Thank you. Great presentation. I had a couple questions. It occurs to me that all the people who haven't been paying all these years, if we were going to really think outside the box, maybe there would be some equity fund that they would pay into to make up for the difference in the swings, but that's probably a bridge too far. Although I would be interested to know if any other cities have done that. But that's more of a rhetorical question. On the collection of the billing options that you mentioned, if the tax assessor's office were to be collecting this new stormwater fee, I assume they'd have to set up some whole new entity to collect from currently tax exempt organizations. That's when I heard that.
Yeah, under either scenario. Oh, I'm sorry, Ghassan.
No, let's go ahead. I mean, the simple answer, yes, there will be they need to create a new mechanism to collect from new people that they do not have on their tax bill.
Yeah, because they don't have any
New
relationship with those people right now, I
Yep.
assume. Have you and I know in your travels, you probably have seen many examples of this, but in this case, did you get as far as looking at the creation of an enterprise fund for stormwater or independent stormwater utility on paper that would collect and administer the funds? I know the Water Collaborative has done a lot of work on that, but I didn't see that in the report. Is that something that you've looked at or will be looking at?
We can, but in consultation with Keith and Henrietta, they did not recommend, they didn't seem to add a lot of value. But again, that could be just a policy decision. Just seems like an added layer to something that already exists, but we're definitely open to.
Well, does it though? Does it exist? I mean, right now, the money just goes into the tax base. I mean, if you were to use the stormwater fee as a funding mechanism to leverage debt and other things, wouldn't you need an enterprise fund the way you have for water and sewer?
We have a separate drainage fund currently.
We have
And
that.
the millage money just goes into that drainage fund at the Sewage and Water Board?
Yes.
And what about the city's portion? You just add that in?
What do you mean?
What about the minor drainage when you take that over? How does that?
We don't have a millage.
There's no separate budget for that money system, the way they just.
It comes out of the general fund?
Yes.
Yeah, you remember we tried to get a millage a couple of years ago, 4 mills.
I do, yeah.
And passing to the public.
Right. Okay. And when do the other millages expire? The other 2 millages?
It's 2031 and 2046.
Oh, wow.
Which is the 9?
2031.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Real quickly, what's next steps?
Well, that's what I was gonna ask. He trampled all over my question.
What great minds think alike. So what really prompted this kind of refreshing the 2016 plan is the conversation that started with the creation of the task force for drainage consolidation that started by the city council. And the idea was to shift the minor system to ours and then call it a day. And I insisted that we need to have a bigger picture assessment of what the cost implications are, because we can't do any better than the city if there's no new funding. So we wanted to reintroduce this concept and educate everybody at what it takes to take on the minor system and enhance the way we do things with the major drainage system. So it's in the hands of the city council at this point, whether they want to take it on now, they want to postpone it. Our obligation is to keep talking about the fact that there is an imminent and very likely loss of millage in 27. And if we don't put something in place to offset that, and then again, the bigger question of fairness, then when will we ever create a fair and equitable funding mechanism? So
Do you plan to meet with the council and share this information, or what's that?
I mean, yes, would love to. It's whether there's an appetite for entertaining something like this. So we had the opportunity to talk to at least one of them at the task force. I think one councilman was.
You were told Councilmember Thomas.
Thomas was not, but they were representatives there, so at least they were, they had the ability to listen, and I've sent them an invitation.
Yeah, I think we can talk strategy later. I would reemphasize the same thing that I shared with you guys before, that we need to position a drainage fee as part of a stormwater management plan. If we go in saying we need a fee, we end up getting into that typical political, well, we don't want to raise taxes or that type of issue. We talk about a drainage and water management plan that's going to include green infrastructure, it's going to include water storage, it's going to include reforestation. That gets a lot further down the road with our political elected officials, rather than just talking about a fee. As part of our drainage and water management plan, there is a fee associated that we need to raise money to execute this plan. So just for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Raphaelis, Keith, and Henrietta. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate the presentation. Okay, with that, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, with that, we move into our next series of presentations, the Fair Share Agreement Financial Update from the City of New Orleans.
Thank you. I'm Eric Smith from the CAO's office, also from the city today. We have Courtney Story, also from CAO, Sarah McLaughlin-Porges from DBW, and Joe Threat, the Chief Resilience Officer from the city. All right, we can go ahead. So we'll first just go over the finances and then talk about the status of various operations and projects we're working on. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So revenue is continuing about a pace from previous years. We've certainly seen the our tourism industry and everything else come back to 2019 levels. If you look at the bottom here, I've just kind of giving you a basis from 22 to 23. You'll see that we are collecting a little bit more revenue than we were same year over year. We're actually slightly outpacing inflation over time. So we're expecting that revenue for 2023, we should see about a 6.8, 6.5% increase over 22, which is slightly ahead of the 4.5% inflation rate that we saw from CPI over the same time period. We can pretty much, I think, expect this to pretty much continue at the same pace. I don't foresee that revenue is going to continue to greatly outpace. We really should start seeing this as pretty much the level that we would expect continuing forward. the outstanding IMF funding from the previous meeting. So there should be an ordinance being put forward to City Council, I believe, this month.
Yeah, we're working on the timing. We're still working to identify the funds for that in advance for next year's payment.
But that should go ahead and allow us to make that appropriation for the $5 million that would then just go through the regular process where Sewage and Water Board will just invoice the city for that amount.
That's an additional $5 million, or that's the first $5 million?
We already paid y'all the $5 million for this year, so this is the advance for the $5 million for next year.
Okay.
So you won't get an additional $5 million next year. We're going to advance it to you now.
Okay, is there just gonna be a $5 million advance or?
No.
Or a $10 million, two $5 million advances?
It's five.
Just the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've agreed on one,
One.
which what we need.
Okay.
And then I think the idea is that moving forward, we just put this as part of the regular budget process. So that
Okay.
again, at the beginning of each year.
So 2025 would just be another $5, okay.
And then we would need a special ordinance to take care of that moving forward. So, okay, and then moving on to some project updates. Sarah, you can speak more directly to where we are with the IMF personnel.
Yeah, personnel, a little bit of movement here, and sorry, these numbers are outdated, but 41 IMF funded positions, we've hired 21. And then we have requisitions in process for all of the remaining vacancies. I think the good news is that for the 21 hires we have made, we've also retained those employees. We're working very hard on employee retention, so I think that's a very good sign. And these are all positions in our maintenance division. They include laborers, equipment operators. They also include signal technicians in our signal shop. So we are moving forward. We're actually in the process of planning a job fair that will be sometime this fall. And we're hoping that will generate some additional interest to those positions. I think I reported on this at the last meeting, but we do have a new principal engineer in our maintenance division, Eric Kelly. I think he may have actually been here last meeting. So he's doing a fantastic job, and we're very excited to have him on board. And I think this is also information from the last meeting.
Thank you.
So yes, I mean, in terms of how we're utilizing these funds, they are to support our right-of-way maintenance contracts. So we have a right-of-way contract for every council district. This allows us to do repairs in the right-of-way that are beyond the capability of our internal crews. We have been seeing a lot of panel failures around the city during this extreme heat. We're dealing with a major one on the West Bank on General de Gaulle, where we're going to have to replace 10 panels. So those are the kinds of things that we're addressing through our right-of-way contracts, as well as more minor things, rebuilding catch basins, doing drain point repairs in the right-of-way and things like that. And then we've also used the funding to help subsidize our traffic management.
And then we also have an update on the DDD drain project.
Okay, go ahead, I'll come back.
Do you have a question?
No, actually, and I'm interrupting the presentation, I realize that, but Sarah, I just want to understand that you're leaving. I want to take a minute to thank you so much for all your service and the great job you've done for this city, and let you know that we're going to miss you.
If I could say that, really when we look at the right-of-way repairs and the max pay, just a point of contention, we've got Super Bowl and Mardi Gras 25. Me and Gassan and the Sewer and Water Board has talked, and aside of the Super Bowl NFL committee, we really need to start looking at the right-of-ways, and we can use the IMF funds, either city or Sewer and Water Board, to address some of those issues right now. It would probably be a good idea.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
And then again, the update on our DDD drainage improvements. I don't know if you want to go over any highlights here, Sarah.
Now that I'm teary-eyed. Not a huge change from last time. I mean, the good news is we've got our designer on board. They have submitted the 30% design for all 18 blocks. And, we're still on track to be out for advertisement before Mardi Gras 2024. Now, there's still a question about how many blocks are actually going to be able to be constructed with the funding that we have. The estimates that we have are obviously several years old, kind of pre-inflation. So that is sort of yet, we'll have to see sort of how that shakes out. But the good news is we are moving forward. There's a lot of coordination happening with Sewage and Water Board. And I know Gassan's been advising the team.
Ask a question. This slide looks to me just like the one we saw 90 days ago. I mean, is really anything changed?
Yeah, absolutely. The update on current, which is that they submitted a 30% design, that was not the same, during the last meeting. I wasn't here for the last meeting, but.
No, I mean, this project seems to be moving incredibly slow. Is my point.
I agree. It was definitely slow to get off the start and to get a designer on board, but I think you're going to start to see some consistent movement now that we've crossed that milestone.
And the construction RFP will be released in January, is that correct, of 2024?
They're still on schedule to do that before Mardi Gras.
And then I think that there's one outstanding issue, if you move to the next slide, which are utility conflicts. Can you speak to any of that?
Yes, so I didn't.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, we're coordinating with Sewage and Water Board. There are probably going to be utility conflicts we need to address. There are point repairs that I think we've spoken about that we're going to have to do as part of this project. So we'll continue to coordinate closely with Sewage and Water Board on that.
All right, and I guess lastly for us is just to briefly discuss where we are with the drainage consolidation working group. Courtney, I believe you were going to.
Yeah, we had a meeting, I think, last month with the Drainage Consolidation Working Group. I think the next one is going to be scheduled for December. There was a request to have the Water Collaborative come present the work that they've been doing. So, the CAO is evaluating that and trying to figure out if that'll work with the schedule. I don't see why it wouldn't. So we're working on that. We are entering budget season, so we're going to be pretty tied up with that and the police chief for the next couple of months. So once that wraps, we'll reconvene and move forward. There's a question about the final report. The legislation from council doesn't actually require any subsequent reports other than what we provided in January of this year. I assume once the direction has been decided, we will produce a final report, but we are not required to. That's sort of where that's at. But we're still moving, we're still talking. We just had the same presentation y'all saw at the last working group meeting as well. So very similar to what y'all are talking about here.
So to sum it up, until we solve the funding issue, we're not going to be able to move forward with a decision.
I think that's an accurate statement, yes.
Always fun.
Unfortunately.
Thank you. Any questions? Any other questions? Let's see. Next on the agenda is City of the infrastructure from Surgeon Water Board or something.
Yeah, we do have a presentation for you. I'm not sure the sequence who gets. Okay, so we're going to start with Ron Spoon, our general superintendent. And then, as you can see, we have a team to present on the other items. All right,
thank you, Gassan. Glad to be here. Quick thing, we're going to go right to the Surgeon Water Board power complex. Everyone knows the West Power Complex is really, so the power program at West Power Complex is two phases. One, which most people hear about most, is the energy substation side. And then the other second side is the Surgeon Water Board complex, which consists of a new operations center, side frequency converters, and a brand new backup power plant, which is really key to the Surgeon Water Board to transition us from an old power plant, 80 to 100 years old on average, to a new state-of-the-art power plant. So this slide, as you can see, the substation work remains on schedule. That is Entergy's substation work that was on schedule for completion in 2024. The transmission line work from the last meeting, it was underway, but right now they're right at 90–95%. That's a good photo of what you see of what that complex substation is going to look like at Entergy. So that's on schedule. The Surgeon Water Board connections, and that's our backup. That's the second part of it. One of our critical contracts that will connect the West Power Complex to our operations center on the east part of campus is contract 1418. The pilot driving activities for the utility right contract is 100% complete. And right now we're currently, as of today, right about 80% of the columns are up. So that with the top hats, and they're in the process of installing the rack. So the rack structures is really the bridge. in order to bridge the West Power Complex to the East Campus, and that's pretty much where we are. We are optimizing that $15 million worth of funding that was awarded to the state legislature, plus the $10 million of the fair share dollars, which Greg, our CFO, would expound upon, to allow us to utilize that to implement that second static frequency converter at peak hurricane season of 2024. So again, we are going to move forward with that, with the two static frequency converter in conjunction with Turbine 7. And the goal is to be ready for peak hurricane season of 2025. As you can see on the next slide is really a rendering, and that's very good rendering of what it's going to look like. So to the right, what's red, the substation, that's in 2D view. So that's Entergy, they're in 2D view, they're Rocky Roland. And then what we really want to expound on a little bit today is the sewage and water board side, what we call phase 1 of the sewage and water board West Power Complex. And you see the two yellow rectangular structures you see there, those are our static frequency converters. So we're going to utilize that 60 hertz power that we're going to generate from the transmission grid from Entergy, and we're going to convert that 60 to 25 because we still have to power some of our existing facilities on 25 hertz power. So again, peak summer 2025 is to have those two yellow boxes operational. And we are also static frequency converted. That is actually being manufactured also, all three. But we will hold the third static frequency converter, quote unquote, in abeyance as far as we get further funding on phase 2. But all three foundations of the static frequency converter are being constructed under the current contract 1450. So you can also see we're driving all the piles for all of the structures there, even we're driving the piles today for our future operations center. So we want to stay ahead of the curve. And then the bottom, almost bottom left, bottom middle, as you can see, Turbine 7, and our generator step-up transformers, that's to convert that voltage from one voltage to another voltage to allow us to utilize that energy power, the auxiliary equipment, and now you see at the bottom is as an animation of our utility rack. So these are our key components in conjunction, and I forgot to mention, our underground electrical conduits and cables. So we are coming together on this critical project for the Sewage and Water Board. So phase 1, which is right now overall cost of the overall project is a little less than 290, right at 290 to 300 million bucks. And phase 1, look at my notes right quick, is a little less than 245, 250 million. That funding is in place, inclusive of the fair share dollars. And we're looking at, we have for phase 1, we have 4 remaining contracts to put out, 2 large contracts we're trying to get out by the end of this year, and the remaining 2 by the end of Q2 of 2024. And just a footnote, as far as those fair share dollars from the inception to where we are right now, we estimate right at $34 million of those fair share dollars will be utilized at the West Power Complex. And I'll turn it over to our smart metering next is with Rebecca Johnson.
Thank you, Rhonda. Before we move on, I think I want to emphasize the point how critical the funding this year was in the capital outlay, working with the CAO, you approving the $5 million going toward it, allowing us to bring a second frequency changer, which is crucial because the actual source of energy from energy is 60 megawatts, right? And if we only have one that produces 22 or allows 22, then we're underutilizing the major investment. So now with 2, we would have all the power we need from that substation. It was a game changer for 2025 hurricane season.
And just so I make sure I understand, so SFC3, you're actually going to have the equipment, but you don't have the balance of the funding you needed for that, or you will have.
To connect.
No, we would not have the funding for the third one to connect it.
You're connected, but it's going to be bought and held in advance. So
right, because the city, as you remember, funded
the other 5 million. So, and you don't have the funding to actually build the operations center, even though you're working on the balance.
Currently in place, I would say there is funding in the queue relative to the capital program, depending upon if the state legislature moves some of the existing funds from P5 to P1, and then that new application into P5 will allow us next year to complete this overall program by the end of 2026.
By the end of 25?
2026.
2026?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Got it, thank you.
With next year's money, hopefully we'll be
Yes.
able to get the 29. We will complete the project in 26.
But once you have funded, you look at it being finished mid-25.
Enough to utilize the substation with having 2 frequency changers, we'll have the T7, we'll have 2 our own generators that we can, if we need, we can use for the 2 frequency changers because the capacity will be there to allow us to meet peak demand.
Okay.
So we're in good shape, but not optimum, or, we're the final stage, which would be 26.
Great. Any other questions on this part of the presentation?
I do.
Oh, so sorry.
The substation, it'll be completed by the summer 2025?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why it was so critical to get the frequency changers in place to utilize the substation. Yeah. Again, good place to be, not optimum, but very good. We're not, it was a minor setback, could have been worse, but we're in good shape. So, thank you, Ron. Moving on to another exciting project, and today we have Rebecca Johnsey, who's the project manager for that project, and I asked her to talk a little bit about all the invisible work that she's been working on, the complexity of this program, and what is imminent in terms of the status of the project, and hopefully you'll have good questions, and it's a show and tell today, so she brought a prototype of what that smart meter will look like.
And the kids are here too, so.
All of you get this.
So hi, thank you for having me. I'm the program manager of smart metering. I have been working on this day in and day out for quite a long time, but we're now to the point where we're ready to start having these conversations with all of our partners. So I'm excited to be here to talk about some of the exciting things that could be coming. It's extremely complicated. If you look at it from a program perspective, we have over 12 different work streams that we're monitoring every single day, and every one of those is a discrete, concrete project. So when you see and you just hear the term smart metering, it's maybe a little bit misleading of the complexities, but we're working through all those with intention. So we just actually had our final initial testing complete as of this morning. We have been working 7 days a week at all hours to make sure that we get integrations completed. Overall, smart metering is a data project. The amount of data that's going to be coming through is completely game-changing to what we're working with now. And so in these types of projects, our data integrations are always critical path. So the pressure has been on that team from day one to complete these integrations. As most people in this room are aware, we have some challenges with our current legacy systems. And so it makes it even more complicated to make sure that those integrations are seamless and we can utilize the data as we would like to. So this morning was a big milestone, and it's very exciting. We've also been making sure that we've swapped over our normal O&M stock to our new technology. We don't want to be putting in meters in the ground that didn't make sense with the technology that we knew was coming. So we actually have smart meters in the ground. Over 2,000 of our 5/8-inch meters are currently in the ground. And we have over 50 of our large meters. That's 1.5-inch or up. Those are Omni meters. They're in the ground. They do not have the radio attachment. That was waiting until our network infrastructure, what you could think of as an umbrella over the city. It's a FCC licensed frequency radio network. We have 9 infrastructure sites with 12 antenna. We had to wait for those to stand up, and then we can actually install the radios on all of our existing meters that are in the ground that have already been upgraded. Part of our detailed communications plan is making sure that we had a solid foundation before we started having these community meetings. We don't want to have more questions pop up than we designed around, so we want to make sure that our design is solid and we're ready to go. So we've been very intentional in how we communicate. I've actually been at City Hall all week giving trainings to all the key departments there to make sure that everyone was comfortable with the technology, understood what was coming. We're prepared to answer the questions that the public might have surrounding this technology. It's new, but it's not necessarily new to this population because we already had Entergy roll through into their smart metering technology, automated metering infrastructure, AMI, over the last few years. So this population has already had it. We've also had it on our side, the Sewage and Water Board. We actually have a 17-year-old pilot program that's still currently operating. I don't know if you can call it pilot because we're 17 years in and we're still good to go. We are actively reading those meters right now, and we are able to use that as design cases for how we're going to transform our utility in the future. How do we use that extra data? How do we make sure we streamline our workforce so that they can do what they do and prioritize it so that we use our time to the best of our ability? The communications have started going out. You can see on the right, this is an example of one of our first postcards that's going out. We send a postcard to the account holders. These are the people that are paying the bill 4 to 5 weeks before we're going to be on site. 2 weeks out, we send an additional postcard that has information on the technology as well as what to expect in the installation. That's going to the service address 2 weeks out to let them know we're coming to your property. And then the day of the installation, we also provide them a door hanger. We have a landing page that has up-to-date information, and we're going to many different avenues to talk. We're sending emails, we're doing agendas. We really want to get the information out there so that people feel comfortable with what's coming. As far as updates on some of our funding, we did get notification that a $5 million application through the state revolving funds for a loan was accepted. And we have an additional $4.8 million that's been applied for through LDEQ. That is also in the first stages of approval. So it's very exciting from that front. I do have the smart meter here. My doctor would kill me if I picked it up because it's very heavy. It's like 50 pounds.
I'll get it.
Okay, so you have the smart meter on the bottom. You can see your radio that's attached just underneath the lid, and that is our new lid design. So it has the crescent, which is so important to the city. I have talked more about lids in the past 6 months than I ever thought I could in my possible lifetime. So this technology, which everyone asks, it's designed to be underwater and covered in lead. So you can go all the way up to the lid, which is the only part that's on top of the ground, and the signal will still get through. It's designed for that application. We have talked to utilities in the area, both south of us and north of us, that are using this technology, and we use their lessons learned to make sure that we're designing as robust a system as we possibly could.
So from this point forward, you guys say you've got the backbone and attached to the backbone, you're 2,000 plus meters. It works, even good size generated, is that right?
I don't have to. That's the idea.
And, but so from this point, you're really starting, how many meters per month do you project you can do, and how long will the process take?
Sure, so we're starting with a very, very slow start intentionally. We want to make sure that the process makes sense for our installation team, that the data makes sense for us to use on our side. So that slow start rollout, we're starting next week, very, very, very slowly, about 15 meters a week, we're going to ramp up. So by the end of the year, which is all slow start, we're going to be around 1,500 meters. When we're in full, 1,500 meters total by the end of the year. So that's all of our meter sizes, 1,500 total meters. And then when we're in full ramp up schedule, it's going to be anywhere between 4,000 and 5,000 meters per month.
What about your workforce needs? Are you hiring people for those particular positions, or you have people already in place to do the installations?
Right, so in the interim, it's tricky because we're operating 2 systems, right? We still have the old system that we have to maintain and operate, and then we're going to go to the new system. So we're transitioning certain key folks, have already transitioned. And then as that goes, we're going to start transitioning some other folks. So we're standing up new job series. We have a lot of data analysts, data scientists. That's all stuff that we need to be standing up. We're working with civil service to do those new job series. And then we're going to have some staff that's transitioning. So certain functions we won't need any longer. So we're going to work on training those folks to transition into these new job series, into new job functions. That training's already started. Everyone's enthusiastic. It's very exciting. And a lot more user-friendly. The new software that our CSM reps will be using, our meter shop will be using, it's more what you anticipate from a modern app view. So it's a lot easier for them. So far the training has been going very well.
So you have a workforce to install the new meters?
Oh, so the installation as part of a project, the project team, so our partners Aquametric are doing the installations. Our meter shop will still install as part of O&M, but they're doing the vast majority of our swaps.
And they're hiring locally?
They are using partners. EMP is a local firm here that is doing the residential installation, and Nocor is the partner. They're a national firm that is doing the large meters.
Sure. I mean, it's always important that as we think about even down the road with villages and whatever we're trying to get the public and community to be part of, is that we work on a local level. That helps build our equity, build our brand, that we are engaged in communities.
If it helps, we can actually connect our vendor and installers with you directly for any potential need for local workforce. So we ever have to do that. Two things I'd like to maybe add on. We are going to hit all 5 districts as equal as we can be. It's kind of somewhat of a neutral approach, but we want to make sure that everybody starts seeing the smart meters. And also important, and I've said this before, once the meter is in place and it's turned on, people can enjoy the benefits and the features of the smart meter instantly. So it's not like you have to wait till the end. So people, by the end of, let's say, the first quarter of next year, they're going to start receiving a bill that's then basically calculated based on the smart meter. Very exciting.
2 questions. The 2,000 meters installed and 50 large meters, obviously they're sitting next to the existing meters, but you still got to be building those.
This is swap. So we take the old one and we put the new one.
So those, are you already billing off of these 2,000 meters then?
Yes, so we are billing, but we're not collecting the reads remotely. So meter reading is still going and actually physically reading that meter. It is the new meter.
So you can physically read this meter as well as, okay, all right, that's good. The antennas were always a problem. Got all 12 of them up, placed, working?
So we have 9 locations and 12 antenna. So we have 3 that are not finalized yet. 2 of those will be installed the first week of October, and then the last monopole, which is in Gentilly, should be stood up by the end of the year.
Okay. And then the last question, Gassan, we talked about trying to get these meters as quickly as possible to the larger customers, so that you can not have big bill problems. Is that part, you mentioned going to each of the districts, but are you still have a plan to go after the bigger hotels and the bigger plants and those types of things?
Yes, well, we're trying to even the distribution among all 5. We're also standing up with separate teams to do the large meters.
Great.
Those require a little bit more coordination, they take a little bit more time, but
they're bigger bucks.
Absolutely, and we're moving forward, meeting with groups and basically educating what to expect and all that.
Great.
I think Becca has one more thing to share about the actual triple coverage for the redundancy for the meters.
Yeah, so 95% of our population is actually read by 3 base stations. So the redundancy in the system is extreme. Not only do we have the capability to pull it up through that network, we can also drive by and get a few neighborhoods just by an antenna on your car. You can walk by and get it on your handheld, or right now when we don't have a radio installed, you can actually flip the top and read it on the meter. So there's a lot of capability, and all of those different areas also have storage. So if there's a reason why we couldn't get it, we can backfill, both from the collectors, the radios, and then the meter itself. So the redundancy in this system is very extreme. We've talked to other utilities that have been through Hurricane Ida with this technology, and the response was fantastic. They didn't lose reads, they definitely lost no vision reads, but they were able to backfill any granularity that they may have missed in that storm.
Good.
Got a couple.
Go ahead, no.
You mentioned the number of meters per week. I don't know how many total meters there are, so I can't do the math. Not that I could do the math anyway. When do you anticipate being completed with the project with all the meters rolled out?
Yeah, so right now we have a 3-year design to finalize all of the installations.
In 3 years?
So we have 140,000 meters. It's quite extensive. One of the things that's important for how we change these out, again, they're designed to just pop out the old and put in the new for the majority. There's a small population that will require some additional work there, but for the majority of your small meters for your residential customers, it's a 15 to 30 minute disruption. For our larger customers, it's 1 to 2 hours. And that's why it's a little bit more complicated. If you're a restaurant, you can't do it during lunch, right? So you're gonna wait and you're gonna schedule that installation for another time.
We have, it's a 3-year project. We have all the funding in place for the entire 3 years.
Not quite, but we're confident that the funding will come. There's no way we can stop this project halfway. but your meter hasn't been swapped and hers has, so. And, you know, I've said this before, if we waited till we have the full $67 million, we would have never started, right? So we're confident funding will come.
The state revolving fund loan program, I'm assuming it's a loan, so I'm assuming it's either no interest or low interest.
It's
Do we have a funding source that's paying that back?
The rate revenue, the like 0.95% interest, so our regular water and sewer rate revenue would pay that back.
Anytime we borrow money, we have to.
It's just gonna be part of the bigger sewage water board loan debt repayments that we factor in.
Yeah, we run the capacity analysis to ensure we meet that service coverage. That's part of that application.
Any other questions? I read that Jefferson Parish is going to a smart meter. I think would it be fair to say we were about 5 months ahead of them?
Sure.
6 months.
I don't know where they are, so.
Any other questions?
No, just very exciting to see all this. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's been a long time coming, but it's going to be great.
Thank you. So we have one more update for you for the surface cuts.
Sure.
Steve Knudsen, our deputy general superintendent, is going to talk about what we've done since the last time we met and the investment that you've trusted us to have and what we're delivering for it. So.
Yeah, we can't thank everyone here enough for the funding that's been provided. It's in a real, very positive, tangible effect. When we started this in 2022, the goal, of course, is to get paving cuts to go from 100 days down to 2 to 4 weeks. As everyone in this room has, I'm sure, experienced, Sewage and Water Board will show, we actually do a pretty decent job of fixing water and sewer repairs. Paving has, however, been a challenge. So we've already seen that reduced from 100 to 80 days. That's 20% faster than it was in 2022. If we can go to the next slide, we see these are some of the resources. Gazan's really had a laser focus on this issue because, as we've talked about before, billing and paving cuts are like the 2 most common complaints that we receive. Part of that, it's a 2-part issue. The first was in July of this year, we had about 3,000 open paving work orders. And we were generating between 40 and 90 holes a week and only able to close about 20 or 30. So we got to do 2 things. We have to eat the elephant. We've got to get from 3,000 paving work orders down to 100 or 200. And we've got to be able to do as many paving repairs a week as holes that we make. And I'm very pleased to report that we are now able to, through hiring 2 additional crews, and this is through internal funding. This isn't necessarily IAB funds, but this is what we've been doing with our existing budgets. We have 2 new crews in the field. We have additional concrete and asphalt equipment in the field, and that's gotten us to be able to make 60 to 90 paving repairs a week. So we've addressed that second issue of being able to stay up with the backlog. And I'm pleased to report that we've gone from 3,000 open paving work orders in July to about 2,500 as it sits right now. We're dropping those by about 100 work orders a week. Last week was a little slower with the rain and the 3-day weekend, but the goal again is to get down to about 1,000 by end of year, eat the rest of that elephant in 2024, and get us to that much more reasonable timeline of 2 to 4 weeks. Huge thanks to DPW for the $8.3 million in max pay that you all contributed, really been helpful. And IAB's $4 million has been a major contribution. Next slide, please. So putting dollars, cents, and numbers to it, we have 2 on-call contractors, and the IAB funds has been funding our on-call contractors, which are responsible primarily for reducing that big backlog. We want to keep up internally, but we want to reduce the backlog with CMG and Wallace Drennan. To date, we have completed $1.8 million in repairs, just over half the budget spent. We have $2.2 million remaining, and I estimate we'll spend that sometime in the month of November. Next slide. That translates into 245 completed work orders with an estimated 270 plus remaining. That first group that we had was a little higher on the unit cost. There were larger asphalt streets. The next round that we had in August, it went from about $10,000 a repair down to about $2,000 to $3,000. We're doing smaller sidewalks, so we're kind of eating the larger chunks first. Next slide. You see the breakout between the types of work orders completed. Of those 245, if you're quick in the math, you'll realize that the pie chart does not in fact add up to the number on the left, and that's because an individual work order can include multiple repair types. As you can probably guess, if you replace an entire water service or sewer service from a house to the main, you're going to cut through a driveway, sidewalk, and or street. So we have more of these individual work order types, just about 300 individual types of repairs within the 245 repairs completed from June through August of this year. And just to kind of wrap things up, we should complete well over 500 work orders by sometime in November. We are currently rebidding our maintenance contracts for the paving because this funding will allow us to use the full contract values for both CMG and Drennan. And I'm really excited to see this elephant eaten in 24 and get us down to those reasonable timelines. And do we have one, is there one more slide or is that it? Oh, and I did want to touch on DPW coordination. We've got a number, these are the FEMA funded projects. We have one in post-construction, 4 in construction. The big one that you all may be most aware of is the 4-foot diameter plastic pipe on Claiborne that's going in the ground right now. That has been, that's going to be a huge project for us. We've seen water production at our Carrollton plant drop by 10% since having that line offline. So what that tells me is that we're having significant water leaks through just that few blocks of a large transmission main. For those of you that are uptown or have friends or family there, you've probably noticed a drop in water pressure since June. That is related to this project. We were hoping to have that completed or addressed a couple of weeks ago. We've had a couple of leaks off sidelines. We hope to have those fixed within the next 2 to 3 weeks and have folks' pressures back to normal.
That project would be finished within a month?
So the water main component should be finished within a month to maybe 6 weeks. The restoration of the street surface will probably be done in about February. We've been working very closely with Tulane, Ursuline, Maine, and residents within the neighborhoods to make sure we're coordinating that. There is another project coming up on the heels of that, further down Claiborne, to do an open trench replacement. This was a liner, so we pulled a new pipe through the old. This next project will be a whole brand new pipe that will make a cut with Claiborne and replace.
And if you want to explain, this is, for this project, this is the first of 2 water main we're replacing them, rehabbing them in this project.
Yes, correct. Yeah, and that's that second piece that we were talking about. What happened further down Claiborne towards the
So it's a road pipe would look like it anyway, it's running down Nashville, Claiborne towards Mountain. Is that part of this project?
Yeah, the big 4-foot pipe.
No,
that's part of,
That's a JR project.
that's a JR project, that's the Marleyville project on State Street.
Right.
Thanks.
If I could you go back to the previous slide? I'd like to understand 500 plus work orders could be completed by contractors by the end of the year. Funding were available. Looking back at the minutes, because my memory's not that good, I specifically asked Steve if you thought the projects could be completed by the end of the year if the full $4 million was funded when we funded it.
Yes.
The answer was you had confidence that that could happen.
Yep.
So why do you need more funding?
Well, because we'll spend the money. It'll all be spent by November.
But it's not going to be finished by the end of the year.
Well, the full project, what we had talked about is getting the number of work orders down.
And we talked about the number of cuts at the end of the year being about 600, and today you're saying 1,000.
Between 600 and 1,000, yes. We've had some discussions about potential additional max pay funding. Doesn't sound like that'll be available. So this project, the $4 million, will get us down.
So your unit costs were more than you anticipated.
Some of those unit costs have been more than anticipated.
So you are looking for additional funding?
Yes, we will be close enough to year's end that we'll be able to use our annual budget for the next round as we rebid the project.
And one of the caveat, the 500 plus work orders, again, there's a continual stream of paving cuts coming. As Stephen indicated, getting at 100 down to 80, eventually down to 2 to 3 weeks. So it really gave us an opportunity to catch up. And that's really the goal, what we go, so we can stay consistent with our contractors, because as you mentioned earlier in this presentation, our crews make quite a few cuts a week, and on the average of 200 to 300 a week. That's a lot of cuts in the roadway. Just to keep up that with the paving perspective, that's what this funding would allow us to do, to keep up with that, catch up with the backlog, and then maintain that current pace that we're trying to do. Less, at 80 now, and eventually get to 2 to 3 weeks. I'm gonna say conservative 30 days. If we can get 30 days, that'll keep us right in a good sweet spot.
Just for what it's worth, I have been bragging about this and saying, this was an example of how, with proper management and sufficient funding, you guys can get a quality of life issue addressed and make our community better. I've even had a conversation with the newspaper about this. I haven't done a story on this yet, but I want to make sure that I understand when we say we're going to get something done by the end of the year, that if something doesn't happen as expected, I'd appreciate some feedback. So I'm not saying something.
Yeah, we were hoping that today's update would give you a clearer picture. I mean, by no means, I take that very seriously, that we're not mispresenting anything.
That's
But
right.
it's
And
fair
I
to
still
say-
don't quite understand
Yeah.
the 500 work orders could be completed. That means you need more money.
We suspect we're gonna run out of funding by November at the rate we're going.
And if I could, I think the city had a commitment every year in the bond sale to contribute to max pay, because it, affects all of us. So we're in the process right now, got a meeting today, matter of fact, working a second tranche of that. The citizen voted bond sale to 200 million. So by December, January, we should have bond funds in, and I can't confirm, but I think that either the 8.3 or some equal to or less than in that range, we plan on committing to the max pay program from the city side.
Thank you.
But I think you should continue with telling the story, because by the time.
I'm going to. Don't let me down.
We would have gotten rid of 2,000 locations, right?
Yeah, and that was my point earlier about the Super Bowl coming up, and it affects us all, so we're gonna try to, cover those cuts up as fast as we can.
And we have one more slide with Ray, with sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Hassan. So just a couple summary slides. The detailed schedules are after on the financials. Happy to say we crossed over the 50 million mark through the July payment. So that's a total revenue, and total expenditures about 15.4 million through August. And then we've had dollars allocated to 37.5 million contracts. And then on the right, we're just confirming what the city indicated. We did receive the 5 million special allocation earlier in June. So very appreciative of all that funding. And then on the next slide, just want to highlight, remind the board of key projects that have been active in the last 3 months. Those power complex, the 3 in the middle, we spent close to 5 million on those alone, and then also some on the smart metering program management. So that $6 million was spent the last 3 months through the fair share of funding, and the auxiliary power, auxiliary package, and some of the things Rob was referring to earlier have been paid for through the fair share dollars. And then finally, the last thing was also highlighted earlier. We wanted to ask the board about allocating the additional $10 million. So that would be in an approved project list to fund the connection of the static frequency changer 2. In addition to this, if you recall, we already have 20 million allocated in the power complex. So this would be an additional 10 million request to be on an approved project list, and then available there once those contracts are bid and ready to go out. So happy to answer any questions on any of the detailed numbers or other questions.
Any questions?
But are you asking us to approve an additional 10 million at this meeting?
Yes.
For the power complex.
Yes, yeah, that would be the funding to have the connection to the static frequency 2.
Okay. is this for specific projects or, you know, we agreed earlier that we'd set aside 20 million more for the power.
Okay.
And subject to you coming back and saying, okay, these are the specific projects and what I mean, is this what you're asking for is, okay, of that 20 million that we agreed, we would set aside fair share. This is 10 million, of which is for the static frequency change in number 2, the connection, the integration contract. Is that right?
Well, I'm adding it incrementally to the original 20 million, so there'd be a total available 30 million that would get matched up with contracts. And this 10 million specifically connected with this staff frequency changer.
I'm not opposed to having that conversation, but, you know, it's 3:36, and I didn't know this request was coming. Unfortunately, I have to leave, and I don't feel prepared to vote on a $10 million commitment and without at least having a little more discussion on it.
Is this something we can wait to the next meeting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, why don't we do that and get a little bit more information? Okay, any other questions? Have you finished the presentation? First of all, thank you all very much for a terrific presentation. Greatly appreciated. Is there any public comment?
No, sir.
Okay. Any other business? Okay, unless there's any other business or any other comments, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Been moved, second.
Thank you guys all. I appreciate it.
Sorry. By the way, I just want everybody to know that the reason that Bill's so interested in these curb is he's going around telling everybody it's going to be done by the engineer at the end of the year. He's saying, if it's not, I'm buying the truck.
Same here.
Good to see you.
Tomorrow,